Ryan Strome and the New York Rangers have avoided arbitration and have come to terms on a new contract, so we'll discuss that as well as some other signings, and we'll take a look at what arbitration cases are remaining. There's not many left. We'll discuss all that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have some breaking news from the NHL. Ryan Strome and the New York Rangers have come to terms on a new contract and have avoided the arbitration hearing, which was really close to getting underway here. So Ryan Strome signs a contract with the New York Rangers, a 2-year deal with an average annual value of $4.5 million. It's not a huge surprise, as I've mentioned before, talking about potential Strome signings or trades or what the Rangers were going to do, how they were going to proceed here. I did not suspect that they'd want to sign him too long term or for anything north of $5 million. I mean, we had reported yesterday that he was looking for 5.7 on his filings, but the team was certainly, well below that. There was a big gap between Strome and the Rangers. The Rangers did end up coming up a little bit, obviously, but certainly not quite the halfway, though. They certainly can say that they get closer to what they wanted than to what he had wanted. But again, those big gaps, as I mentioned before, are quite common. But I'm just not confident that the Rangers see Strome as a big money player they want to have in their system for a long time. Of course, they're going to have some young players in 2 or 3 years looking for some big raises, assuming that things go as expected here with like Capo Caco and Alexis Lafreniere. So they have to factor that in for future cap considerations. They've got some other big-time contracts already locked up, so they have to be mindful here. And I'm just not sure that Strome, like I said, is right now that they're not convinced that he's long-term in the plans here. So either way, it just brings him to being an unrestricted free agent at the end of the contract. He was only 1 year away from being eligible for UFA status, so he gets that in 2 years instead of 1, and he'll continue to be a good player for them in their top 6. Obviously, he's had a lot of time to play with some good solid players, a lot with like Panarin, and he'll have a chance to play with some of these other young guys as well, possibly even Lafreniere or Caco, depending on how they decide to do their top 6 this year. So clearly he's a benefactor of playing with some really solid players, but overall he is a good hockey player. I'm just not sure that he's going to be in the long-term plans for the Rangers once a lot of these younger prospects kind of develop here. They're kind of waiting for Filipino to possibly take over that number 2 center role as well, I think. So we'll see. Either way, it's a pretty good contract. I think it's a good signing, but I'm not surprised it's shorter term and for less money than we were talking about here. Like I said, less than $5 million. Now, we also have some other signings to talk about here today. Nothing too substantial, but certainly some signings that could have future impact. For example, the Buffalo Sabres signed goaltender Dustin Tokarski to a 2-year contract. Now, it's a 2-way deal. He gets league minimum at the NHL level, but he also gets a pretty substantial American Hockey League salary as well. In the first year of the contract, Tokarski gets $150,000 at the AHL, and then in year 2, he gets $200,000. Now, you might be wondering why they would bring in a guy like Tokarski, who really came out of junior with a lot of potential, but he's another goaltender who really never developed into being a full-time NHLer. I think he has around 20 to 30 NHL games under his belt, but never was a consistent regular player at that level. Pretty good American Hockey League goaltender, had a pretty solid junior career. Of course, they have Carter Hutton and Linus Ullmark, who they signed. But of course, they're both on 1-year contracts. At this point, Hutton has 1 year left. They signed Ullmark to a 1-year deal. So they're both unrestricted free agents. So this, more than anything else, is about adding some extra depth and mostly about the expansion draft to have a goaltender that's eligible to be taken in the expansion draft next year. Of course, all teams have to have a certain number of players at these positions available. And at this point, if Hutton and Ullmark are both unrestricted free agents, no guarantee that they're back. I think it's pretty much a given that Carter Hutton is not back. Ullmark could return. Of course, they do have youngster Ukko-Pekka Laukkonen, who would not be eligible for the expansion draft at this point as of yet, but he's certainly a part of their future as well. So they needed a goaltender to kind of round out some depth here and at the same time have something that can be available. That's why he gets the 2nd year. So clearly you're going to see some deals. We've already seen others. We could see a few more like that, especially in these fringe goaltenders who could be on the number 3 or 4 spot on the depth chart. But it's all about having the right player available for the expansion draft, depending on what other contracts expire before the expansion draft next year. So an interesting signing, but he's there should they need him. He'll likely play in the AHL with Laukkonen, to be my guess, considering what they're paying him. I can't imagine he would certainly go down any lower in the depth chart from there. But they do have another goalie as well, Johansson, who actually had some American Hockey League time last year and actually was pretty good. So I'm not sure if he'll maybe remain playing in Sweden. He's a Swedish goalie, so I don't know if he'll stay in Europe for the year or what their plans are for him. But fair to say Tokarski will be at the AHL level for sure, and we'll see about the other two guys. Now, the other signing here as well, the Edmonton Oilers have signed defenseman William Lagesson, Swedish defender, to a 2-year contract extension. It's a 2-way deal in year 1, but it's a 1-way deal in year number 2. He gives him an average annual salary of $725,000. He gets $700K at the NHL level in year 1, $750 in year 2 for the $725 average. He's played so far, I think it's just a little over 90 American Hockey League games and has done all right. So clearly they see him as being a pretty good potential for their the blue line for the future. He's 24 years old, he'll be 25 around the time the next season gets underway. Obviously they have a lot of younger defensemen in the loop here already, between guys like Nurse and Bear and Jones at the NHL level. They get Bouchard and Broberg on the way, so difficult to say exactly what kind of role he plays with them, but at least he'll have an opportunity here in the second year on a 1-way contract. Jets have signed unrestricted free agent forward Marko Dano, who's a familiar face to the Winnipeg Jets. He gets a 1-year, 2-way contract. His American Hockey League salary, again, though, is a more substantial one than we normally see. He gets league minimum at the NHL level, but $150,000 at the AHL level. So, of course, Dano, a former first-round pick from 2013, has never really panned out to be a real consistent, solid NHL player like many thought he would be. But obviously, like I said, he's spent 3 years in the Jets system before. Had a fair bit of NHL time. He wasn't consistently up and down. Now, 2 out of those 3 years, he was up and down in the NHL and AHL. The year 3, he was in the NHL the whole time, but he was a scratch a lot, so he didn't normally play a ton. I think he played 20 to 25 games. So Dano is a player, though, based on the current depth of the Winnipeg Jets, that I wouldn't be surprised that he actually could compete for a roster spot for the coming season. Maybe they'll actually bring him back and it'll work out that he'll grab a spot and be a regular. Who knows? But either way, he gets him some extra money to play at the AHL level if they feel that's where he fits best with their organization. And at the end of the day, gets him another veteran guy at that level as well, somebody who can at least be a good call-up option. So Dano goes back to Winnipeg after a couple of years bouncing around with other NHL teams. Now, the other bit of news that came out yesterday as well is the Penguins made another announcement when it comes to their front office. They have promoted Patrick Alvin, who was formerly their director of amateur scouting for the past 3 years. He's been with the Penguins organization for 14 seasons in total in a variety of roles. He now gets promoted to be assistant general manager to GM Jim Rutherford. Of course, Rutherford's been kind of shaking things up, moving some people around and letting some people go in the front office here. We saw him let go Jason Carmanos recently, who was with the club for an extended period of time, somebody who's worked with Rutherford for a really long time between their time in Pittsburgh and previously with the Carolina Hurricanes organization. Alvin's a guy, though, like I said, has been with the organization a long time, somebody Rutherford knows well, and has earned an opportunity to be promoted. Of course, we also saw Rutherford bring in newly retired NHL player Trevor Daley on in a hockey operations advisory type of role recently as well. So we'll certainly get a different look, Penguins executive and management team. So another move there by the Penguins. Now, of course, as I mentioned, I also want to take a look at the remaining restricted free agents that have arbitration cases remaining. We've only seen one contract so far this offseason be awarded by an arbitrator, and that was the Red Wings' Tyler Bertuzzi, who took a 1-year contract offer through arbitration. Now, we only have 2 cases left. Everybody else has settled ahead of time, and some of these are going to have to be settled here in the next few days, or they're going to end up in arbitration, like Brendan Lemieux of the New York Rangers. Of course, they signed Strome today. Lemieux's their last one. So he has a hearing scheduled, I believe it's for tomorrow. So if they don't come to terms with him before that hearing gets underway tomorrow, then they'll have to proceed with that. As I mentioned before, in case you don't know, the rules have changed this year for arbitration cases. Once the hearing gets underway, they are no longer allowed to negotiate. In the past, they could negotiate right up until the arbitrator made their announcement and awarded the contract. Now they can't do that. Once things get started, they're done, and the arbitrator has complete control of how that situation ends. So Brendan Lemieux of the New York Rangers, one of 2 remaining restricted free agent cases waiting for arbitration tomorrow. Then we also have Florida Panthers and defenseman Mackenzie Weegar, who he is scheduled for an arbitration hearing on November the 8th. Of course, we've heard comments from Weegar's agent saying how disappointed they were with how things have gone with negotiations with the Panthers organization. He's also been a big-time player that's been in the rumor mill a lot this offseason. Obviously, we've seen the Florida Panthers make a few trades, and his name has been out there a ton. Lots of teams apparently that have interest in bringing him in as a defenseman, and they have not made a move. They have not signed him, so we will see what happens when it comes to Weegar here. Teams might be more willing to make a trade for Weegar once the contract situation is resolved, so they know what they're going to have to pay him. Obviously, they would have ended up in an arbitration case as well, which wouldn't really have made sense because they're not as familiar with the player that the Panthers were since he's been with them for the last number of years. So we'll see if Weegar and the Panthers can come to terms ahead of time. Wouldn't be surprising if either of these last two cases do end up going through arbitration, but like I said before, it's probably for the best if they can come to terms on their own ahead of time here and get this situation resolved on their own. So that is all your updates here for now. We'll likely be back later with another video talking about other news from around the NHL, so stay tuned for that. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.